A pretty shocking report was just published in the New York Times a few hours ago where they allege that Chosen Company, a group of Western volunteers fighting in Ukraine, has been executing Russian prisoners of war in direct violation of the Geneva Conventions. They say in Ukraine, killings of surrendering Russians divide an American-led unit. A German medic said he was so troubled that he confronted his commander. Others boasted about the killings in a group chat. Now, in both this war and the war in Gaza, you'll often see people throw out the allegations of war crimes for things that really aren't. And I spend a lot of time in previous videos trying to break those down to say, the use of a certain type of munition is not a war crime, or the way that this was carried out is not really a war crime. The execution of prisoners of war or an enemy soldier in your captivity is hands down, without question, a war crime. So what we're going to do with this report here is run through the information provided by the New York Times. I'm going to add a little context when I think it's necessary, but I think the most important thing here is just to get this information out there for further discussion. They say hours after a battle in eastern Ukraine in August, a wounded and unarmed Russian soldier crawled through a nearly destroyed trench, seeking help from his captors, a unit of international volunteers led by an American. Casper Gross, a German medic in that unit, said he saw the soldier plead for medical attention in a mix of broken English and Russian. It was dusk. A team member looked for bandages. That is when Mr. Gross said a fellow soldier hobbled over and fired his weapon into the Russian soldier's torso. He slumped, still breathing. Another soldier fired, quote, just shot him in the head, Mr. Gross recalled in an interview. They say the shooting of the unarmed, wounded Russian soldier is one of several killings that have unsettled Chosen Company, one of the best-known units of international troops fighting on behalf of Ukraine. Now, it's not just the testimony from Mr. Gross here, the German medic. There were a handful of these incidents that he said he was there in first person, witnessed them himself. Others, more secondhand accounts that he heard from other members of the unit. But they also, throughout this investigation, the New York Times said, looked at GoPro footage, helmet cam footage from Ukrainian soldiers, drone footage from overhead, notes from the units after they wrapped up the battles, and then text messages in the unit's group chat. Now, Chosen Company, is a little background here. You've certainly come across, if you're following this war at all, you've certainly come across footage from this organization. It's led by Ryan O'Leary. I believe he's the overall commander of Chosen Company, former U.S. Army National Guardsman from Iowa. In this article, they say Chosen Company is made up of around 60 soldiers from 12 different companies, and they currently fall under the command of Ukraine's 59th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade. So it's an international volunteer unit. They say that Chosen often acted as shock troops, teams that could lead assaults and clear Russian positions despite heavy fire and sometimes heavy casualties. Again, they've released a ton of footage of very serious fights that they've been in. No doubt Chosen has been at the front for a very, very long time and participated in some very significant combat operations over the last couple of years. They did say that they were able to reach out to Ryan O'Leary for an interview, and he mentioned that, or he denied that any of his members had committed war crimes, said that his fighters had, however, killed wounded Russians, but only those who could have fought back. And that is a point of clarification here that's worth mentioning. It is not a war crime to kill a wounded soldier if they are trying to, or you believe them to be a threat where they could still endanger friendly forces. That's a key note. However, it doesn't look like that's actually what happened, according to the New York Times. They add that soon after the Times began asking questions of members of Chosen Company, O'Leary vowed to find out who was speaking to journalists, saying, quote, in the group chat, some stuff the reporter brought up was only known by a few people. We will cast a wide net, regardless, to snare the rapid. So that's not good. You don't want to hear that. I mean, I guess on the one hand, if this is all fabricated, made up information, it's one thing. You want to find out who's putting out bad information about your unit, painting them in a bad light. But based off what the New York Times has here, it seems like there's at least some validity to these claims. You don't like hearing that there's a search now to find out who's releasing that information that, quite frankly, should be known to the public if war crimes are being committed. Now, running through the three different incidents here, we're going to start with incident one that they say that occurred on August 23rd, 2023. Just over a dozen soldiers from Chosen joined a small Ukrainian force on a mission that became known as Operation Shovel. So throughout the war in Ukraine, there's a lot of small operations happening day in and day out that we don't really hear about in the Western media. Small raids here and there that just, quite frankly, don't make the news compared to larger offensives and counteroffensives. This is one of those. They say Chosen stormed the trenches in vehicles and then on foot, surprising the Russian soldiers and pinching them on either side. The fighting was mostly over in less than a half hour. Everyone in Chosen survived, although some were wounded. Most of the Russian forces died, but a few fled, taking cover in nearby craters that had been left by explosions. One of the three in a nearby crater was dead. Two others in a nearby crater appeared to have been alive, one wounded. One was dressed in olive-colored battle dress, seemed to try to get the attention of chosen company troops. This is according to drone and GoPro footage. He puts his hands in his mouth, or on his mouth, apparently trying to call out. He fires his weapon directly in the air, then puts it down and approaches the edge of the crater with his hands up, which, a sign of wanting to surrender. Besides him is another Russian soldier who appears wounded and barely moves. It doesn't look like from the footage that there's any or according to the New York Times, any indication that wounded soldier was doing anything to try to surrender. He wasn't actively trying to surrender. He also doesn't appear to have actively been fighting back. He was wounded and just dealing with his wounds. They say how much chosen team knew about these men is unclear and potentially significant to the question of whether the killing that came after was justified. The surrendering soldier has his hand raised for several seconds, as seen from the drone footage, when a grenade lands nearby, killing him. So the allegation here from the New York Times is that this one Russian soldier was clearly trying to surrender, had his hands in the air, and as chosen company personnel spotted him, they threw a grenade in and killed him. This is one. The others we're going to get into here a little more clear cut. This is one where it really depends on what the person could see in chosen company. If they knew there were Russians in a trench and they just wrapped up a firefight, and you don't know if they're ready to surrender or not, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the continuation of the battle. However, if it was clear to multiple people in chosen company that somebody was trying to surrender, and instead of allowing that surrender to happen, you lobbed a grenade or opened fire to kill those surrendering soldiers, that is a clear violation of the law of war. Moving to Incident 2. They say as Operation Shovel winded down that same day, Chosen secured the trench line and waited for reinforcements. Around dusk, Mr. Gross said a badly injured Russian soldier who had been presumed dead began crawling through the trench calling for help. A Chosen soldier from the United States known as Cossack knew some Russian and tried to speak with him. When Cossack said he was an American, the injured man began saying help and surrender in English. And this is according to Mr. Gross, who was right there, supposedly. The Cossack began calling out for first aid equipment, and Mr. Gross said, I think he wanted help. He's trying to get medical attention for this wounded Russian soldier, severely wounded Russian soldier that remains behind in the trench. It was then, Mr. Gross said, that Zeus arrived, another call sign for one of the soldiers in Chosen Company, and shot the Russian soldier in the chest. Mr. Gross said he was breathing and wiggling around, and then Cossack shot the soldier in the head with an AK in what Mr. Gross assumes was a mercy kill. So according to this assessment, kind of breaking it down, again, wounded Russian soldier in the trench, began to provide medical attention. A member of Chosen Company comes over, shoots him in the chest, shoots him right in the chest, falls over, breathing, wiggling around, and then a second Chosen soldier shoots him in the head, possibly as a mercy kill as he's continuing to suffer. Mr. Gross, the German medic here, said that Zeus, the guy who came over and shot the wounded soldier in the stomach, bragged 1,000 times about killing that surrendering Russian. Again, you're going to see this as a theme from start to finish throughout this thing. It's a lot of hearsay. There's some footage, some first-person accounts, but this is why these types of things need to be investigated. Who did he say that to? Where did he say that? Did he document it? Because then it becomes an entirely different event. But again, when you're talking about a wounded soldier and somebody comes over and just shoots them while they're seeking medical attention, there's no gray area there. That is, no matter who does it, anywhere around the world, that is a war crime. The third incident was a couple months later in mid-October, where they say around a dozen Chosen members were called on to try to halt a Russian advance. They say afterwards, a group chat lit up alluding to the shooting of Russian prisoners. Andok, another call sign here, who briefly took charge that day, said his team had been exhausted and low on ammunition. They had no reinforcements and nobody to carry the wounded. He said, quote, and then someone's like, we got these captures. We have prisoners. And he responded, why the fuck aren't they sleeping? Sort them out. If indeed that's what's actually happened. Now, Andok, what he's getting at here is they're exhausted. They're at the end of this mission, running out of ammunition, maybe food and water, aren't getting reinforcements, have their own wounded they're trying to deal with. And somebody says, hey, we got some captured Russian soldiers. And when he says, why aren't they sleeping? Sort them out. What that alludes to is they shouldn't be prisoners. They should be dead. Shoot them, kill them, leave them here. It's one less thing to deal with. We don't have the time, the people, the manpower to deal with prisoners of war right now. And even if that's the case, it's still a war crime. You still cannot shoot and kill prisoners of war after people have surrendered. Now, after these messages came out, Andok said that he sent the messages in jest and did not order any shooting. But according to this New York Times investigation, it sounds like everybody in the unit took it at face value, like it really did happen. One of the members wrote back asking if there was any GoPro footage. He said if it wasn't captured on film, we're good. Because if not, it's sound, he wrote, as in we're going to get away with it as long as it wasn't on footage. Someone else said no GoPro footage, didn't happen. Another soldier wrote. Now, Mr. Gross, the German medic, was not on that mission, but he said that Zeus, the soldier that shot the Russian soldier in the stomach earlier, later bragged to him directly about the killing. In a journal entry he put down in October, Gross wrote, quote, "Today a good friend willingly executed a bound prisoner. As the prisoner was sitting in a trench with his jacket draped over his shoulders, Zeus came up behind him and shot him in the back of the head multiple times. Going to bed." So again, you got a lot of different versions here and varieties here of what happened, from first-person accounts to footage of what actually happened to group chats to secondhand account type things. But across the board, what's being alleged here are clear violations of the law of war. Every one of these accounts, if they are factually accurate, are war crimes, need to be investigated, of course. And I think that's kind of the major takeaway from this article, whether it's Ukrainian soldiers, whether it's Russian soldiers, or in this case, it is foreign volunteers fighting alongside Ukraine against Russia. The Chosen Company folks have done a lot of good work, pushing back the Russians in a lot of areas and been involved, again, in very significant combat all along the front. They've sacrificed their lives, many of them, for Ukraine and for Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. However, none of that matters when it comes to the law of armed conflict. And no matter who they are, hopefully there is an investigation that comes out of this and more details are made public. That's all I got for now. I will link this article in the description below, along with our Substack that covers a variety of other national security subjects. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.